Good evening, everybody. So thank you very much for that kind introduction. I got 15 more years of experience from that. I've actually been working for 23 years, but I hope that I'll make it to 38 years. So I really want to, first of all, thank Travis, Becky, and the entire AGC team for inviting me to be here tonight. And I could tell from the way they were getting me ready, because they get the speakers ready before they walk in the room, that this is a first-class organization. Then when I walked into this place tonight, was greeted and saw all the beautiful ways in which they take care of us. This is my first event, but it won't be my last. Something's really special going on here, so thanks for having me. So here, what I'm going to be speaking about tonight is how to improve your networking return on investment. And there's a lot of things we could be speaking about around that, which I'll mention in a moment. But let me ask you a question first. What is it that you are looking for most when you come? Why do you network? What are you looking for? What's your outcomes that you're looking for? Contacts, right? What else? Be a connector. So give first, right? What else? More business, right? Grow your business. Anything else you'd like to add?
Support from other business owners.
Sorry?
Support from others.
So you're getting coaching and other support from other business owners. Been there, done that, here's what I'd suggest. And all of those are great reasons, right? And they're not surprising. I mean, if I got another group in here, a lot of the same things would come up. So I'm going to be speaking about, or going underneath the hood of what networking is all about, and talk about more the approach or the mindset, or what I call the heart set, that we need to bring to the networking experience. There's a lot of things we can do to be effective networkers, right? You know, number one, develop a strategy for your networking. Think about where you have to go, where the best groups are, where you can make the best connections, and where the people are that you need to connect with. Number two, you know, everybody knows that it's really important to come to a networking event ready to articulate clearly what it is that you're all about, the problem you solve and for whom you solve it. You know, some of you may see the value of having a technology, a CRM, a client relationship management system that you put all those cards into. And so you can reach down into that technology and connect to those people and be reminded to connect to those people. And finally, you know, as Jason was summarizing, we also need to be effective in the sales conversation, because it's through networking that we build those connections and have those sales conversations, right? So all that's important, and those are the strategies and tactics of networking. But what I want to talk about tonight again is what is the orientation that we have to take to be effective in all those strategies and tactics. You know, a great management consultant, Peter Drucker, who's heard of Peter Drucker here? Right? And you probably heard his phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? Well, I like to say that your approach to networking eats your strategies and networking strategies and tactics for dinner. It's really about how you approach. When you think about it, when you're walking into an event, you see an old networking friend and you go up and you make this connection, it's like you've always known each other, right? There's something that happens in that connection. And yet the question is, how can we bring that into every interaction that we have with people at a networking event? So I want to talk, before I say anything more, I want to share a little story about why the power of one's approach can make a huge difference. I was working with a senior executive partner in a large Big Four consulting firm as a coach. I've been doing this work for 23 years and have worked with some outstanding leaders. I'm really honored by the ones that I've worked with. And this particular individual was a senior partner. He was in his early 50s, highly successful, and you have to be to get to that level in those kinds of firms. We were talking about networking one day, and he turned to me and he said, "I despise networking." And I was like, wow, that's a strong word. And being a good coach, I didn't say, that doesn't sound good. I asked him a question. I said, tell me what you mean more about despising it. Why do you despise networking? It was really caught me off guard. And he said, David, everybody goes to networking events and talks about themselves. And it seems like the person waits till the other person ends, and then they get to talk about themselves. And it was an interesting perspective. And I said, okay, I hung in there with him. And I said, so if you had a magic wand, what would you do? And how would you approach it differently? And he said, well, I'm an introverted guy. And I think I would just go in and I would be curious and I'd ask a lot of questions. And I'd get to know them. I'd make it about them and not about me. And I'm sitting there like, it's unbelievable that he just said that, because that's my strategy. That's what I would say to do. And I said, so why don't you try that? And in short, I could tell as soon as I said that, this relaxation came over him. And it was almost like a weight got lifted off his shoulders. And he said, okay, I'll give it a try. And we talked a little bit more with him about that and how he should approach it. And then let it go for a while. And we continued our process. And about 3 weeks later, I walk into the session and he says, David, you remember that networking conversation we had the other week? I said, 3 weeks ago. I said, yes. He said, I've been working it and something amazing happened. I said, Rick, tell me what happened. He said, well, I started going to these networking events and I started doing, as you said, and it was a lot easier to do and much more effortless. And I started actually enjoying the process. And I met this CFO, and their company had just recently been through a merger and acquisition. And during that merger and acquisition, they started having challenges with their financial system. And so, without going into a lot of detail, he said, we had further conversation, and I left it at that, left the networking event. The next day, the phone rang, and it was him. He said, I'd like you to come in and meet with our team. And long story short, 3 days before that coaching call, he had met with that team and closed a $1.5 million project. So that changed his entire approach. His approach was the issue. Now, he resisted maybe what he could have done differently, but he shifted his approach and his orientation in such a way that he could be himself. So what I want to talk about today is how do we do that on a regular basis? And it comes down to 4 fundamental things I want to talk about. And fundamentally, this, you heard of the golden rule before? Golden rule, do unto others as you wish they do unto you. Well, this is the practical application of that. So when we go into networking events, a lot of times what we tend to do is get nervous about making sure we're articulating what we need to articulate. And a lot of times we end up in our heads trying to do that, or looking around the room for who we should talk to. And the key is if we walk in, as we heard, and with an orientation to give and an orientation to focus on other people, something different occurs. So the 4 steps in this kind of approach or orientation are: be present, make a genuine connection, be curious, and play the long game. Networking is a thing of momentum. As you meet people, make connections, and as you've probably seen this as you've come to AGC over time, you've built more and more connections. And as those connections build, you have coffees and lunches and conversations outside the networking circle, something happens. And why does that happen? Why does that happen, that progression, that momentum? What's the core element of that? Relationship and trust. So you can start doing that when you first meet somebody, and that's what I want to talk about, the entire approach. So the first one is to be present. So what does it mean to be present? We have some experts in the room. What does it mean to be present? Listen, show up. Pardon? Make eye contact. Right. So all that's true. And ultimately, it's about being here now. Right? Being here now. So example is if you go into a networking event, if you're starting to think about, I need to connect with Jason. I see Jason across the room, and Mary comes up to me and starts having a conversation. What do I do? Now, my mind gets distracted and still thinking about going to talk to Jason, right? But Mary's in front of me. So being here now means shifting my attention and making a decision. Am I going to talk to Mary, half-heartedly, fully, or am I going to say, can you give me a minute? I got to go talk to Jason, right? That's being in the present moment, right? But when you're in the present moment, think about it from a point of view of the golden rule. We all want people to be present for us, don't we? Right? It's obvious. So when we are present for them, what happens? They become present for us. That's the secret sauce right there. Because think about a time when you are maybe not present, you're maybe thinking about the next thing to say. I'm sure nobody in the room here has ever done that. Never has had that happen. That we take a moment and we're thinking about what next to say. What happens, do you think, on the other side of that conversation? Do you think people know that at some level that that's occurring? Intuitively, we know it because we're more than just visually picking things, cues up. But when we shift our attention and we begin to engage and make a connection and be present for somebody in that moment, and what that is, the simple thing is that we shift our focus over to them, and then what happens is they turn their attention towards us. That's what happens. So that's the first step. And the key simple step in doing that is simply using your attention, which is one of your greatest powers, and externalizing it as much as you can and pay attention to what the other person is saying. Very simple, but not necessarily easy. And that's why it can take doing some other things to get into that place to be able to do that more regularly. But that's what I'll say about it for right now. Oops, wrong button. There we go. So now that you're present with the person, the next step is make a genuine connection. So how do you know you have a genuine connection? That's what they'd say. Let's say you're standing in front of somebody and you're having a conversation. Where do you sense that you have a connection with somebody? Eye contact? Talking about something other than work. Any other thoughts? Where, in what part of our field of experience, mental, emotional, or physical, do we experience connection? Emotion. Yeah, pardon?
Feels good in my gut.
Feels good in your gut, exactly. It's a feeling. It's a feeling. And the question is, how do we form that connection? That's the next question. Ask questions and be interested, right? But the other thing is and why do we ask questions? A lot of times you go, where'd you go to school? Where'd you grow up? What do you care about in your business? What are we looking for there? Commonalities. So we connect simply through commonalities. Another thing you may have heard is when we're in connection with people, what happens is the physical experience begins to match and mirror the other person. So you can check that out. If the person is kind of starting to walk out the room, maybe you're not in rapport or you're not making a connection. But you can flip that around and you can begin to match and mirror some parts of their body language, and it's been shown that can build some level of rapport. Now, these first two steps, which is turning our attention towards the other person, being present, and then making a genuine connection, has a lot to do with opening up the relationship with finding some commonalities, begins to build an initial level of trust. Not a deep trust, but that's what you're trying to do at a networking event. You're trying to develop and deepen trust. That's the primary purpose of being there. You can have sales happen at a networking event, but it's rare. I'm totally open to it, for it to happen, but my main thing is, when I go to a networking event, is to connect, build relationship, and build trust. And that each time I see a person, it's opportunity not to build the relationship for any other reason than to do that. So there you have it. As far as what's next, it's about being curious. And somebody just mentioned, we ask questions. So again, this is another way in which you can begin to build trust by asking deeper questions. And you can start by asking things like, tell me about your business. Tell me about what you love about their favorite client that you work with, or something like that. And as you ask those questions and you're present and you're connected, you can go to questions like, possibly, what keeps you up at night about your business? What are the greatest challenges you're facing in your business right now? And as an entrepreneur or as a business owner. And those open up the dialogue even further. So Then finally, sorry about that, we have to play the long game. The idea is that you play the long game, and that through that networking is all about building momentum, and that starts with following up. If somebody asks you for, you say you're going to offer them something, and you're going to send it to them, and you're going to follow up and set up a coffee, etc. So it's really about starting with that step, and then from there, making sure that you're orienting to give first. Make a connection for them, as somebody mentioned. Do other kinds of things that would, send them an article that you think they'd be interested in. And the idea is to develop that relationship over time. So with that, I want to kind of complete with us. Do I have a couple minutes for a story? Yeah. So with that, I would like to kind of close the story and just really want to thank the Minneapolis business community. I've been here for about a year, and this business community has welcomed me with open arms. I came from Maryland, so I came from the DC area. And I'm still learning in this process of networking. I was, a couple weeks ago, about 8 weeks ago, I was sitting with a guy at a networking event watching a presentation. And at first, he seemed a little standoffish to me, right? And at that point, I kind of noticed that I went into my head and kind of wrote him off, right? And during the presentation, I started thinking about it. I said, David, that doesn't seem right. So at the end of the presentation, I just turned to him, gave him another chance, and said, how do you think the presentation went? And he said, it was spectacular. I'm going to take one or two things back and work. And the guy got real animated. We started having a conversation, and it continued with beer afterwards. And it followed up with a lunch. And this was me recognizing my own judgments and how I get in my own way. And long story short, at lunch, he began to open up about his own challenges at work with his boss, and fundamentally told me that he was concerned about a situation that was unfolding at work, and that he was concerned about it. When I asked him to look at it in another way, I asked him to flip that around and take a look at it from a leadership perspective. He got some new insights, and without me even realizing it, he turned to me by the end of the session and asked me to talk about a potential coaching relationship. Now, I wasn't necessarily looking for that. And that's, again, the way that it turns out. You just never know when you're having an interaction with somebody what can happen when you're simply focusing on their needs and their concerns. And I can promise you, if you do that enough, you'll find plenty of people that will meet your needs and concerns, and your networking ROI will be improved. So thank you very much.